Hello, welcome to today's edition of Daf Yomi. Today's Daf is Shevout Daf 9 Amud A. The Gemara challenges, but then let the external goat atone for both for itself, i.e. for cases that it normally atones for, and for that which the eternal goat normally does atone for. And the practical difference will be in a case of the defiling of the temple or the sacrificial foods that occurred between the offering of this goat and that goat. If it occurs after the internal goat's blood presentation, then the eternal goat, then the external goat will affect the atonement for it. The Gemara explains, the verse states, Aaron shall bring atonement upon its corners once a year in Exodus 30:10. The emphasis on the term once a year teaches that this atonement for the specific case that atones for it should be only once a year. According to the Mishnah, the eternal goat, for a case in which there was no awareness at the beginning, but there was awareness at the end. The Gemara asks, but according to Rabbi Shmuel, who says, for a case in which one did not have awareness at the beginning, but did have awareness at the end, that person is liable to bring an offering. For what does the goat whose blood presentation performed outside sanctuary atone? The Gemara answers, it atones for a case in which one did not have awareness, neither at the beginning nor at the end. The Gemara challenges this answer. But for that case, the goats of the festivals and the goats of the new moons atone. The Gemara explains, he holds in contrary to the opinion of Rabbi Meir, who says, the atonement effected by all the goats offered as part of the additional offerings, either those of the new moon, the festivals and Yom Kippur is the same. They all atone for various cases of defiling of the temple or sacrificial foods. The Gemara asks, but if Rabbi Shmuel holds that the internal goat atones for a situation in which there was no awareness at all, with regard to what halacha does the Torah juxtapose the internal goat with the external goat? The Gemara explains the juxtaposition teaches that just as the internal goat does not atone for other transgressions, so too the external goat does not atone for the transgressions. Rather, they both atone only for the defiling of the temple or sacrificial food. The Mishnah teaches for the defiling of the temple or sacrificial foods in which one did not have awareness, neither at the beginning nor at the end, the goats brought as sin offerings as part of the additional offerings of the festivals, and the goats brought as sin offerings as part of the additional offerings of the new moon's atone. This is the statement of Rabbi Yehuda. The Gemara elaborates. Rabbi Yehuda says that Shmuel says, what is the reasoning of Rabbi Yehuda? The verse states with regard to additional offerings of the new moons, and one goat for a sin offering to the Lord, Numbers 28:15. The final phrase literally means a sin to the Lord, alludes to the fact that this goat atones for a sin of which only the Lord is aware, i.e. where there's no awareness either at the beginning or at the end. The Gemara objects, but this phrase is necessary in order to expound it in accordance with the statement of Reish Lakish, as Reish Lakish says, what is different about the goat brought as a sin offering of the new moon that is stated with regard to it, to the Lord, a term not written with regard to other sin offerings? The Holy One, blessed be He, says, as it were, this goat shall be an atonement for the fact that I diminished the size of the moon. So what does that mean? Kapara shel shemit anti v'chula. The Gemara in Tractate Chulin 60b elaborates with an allegory. When God first created the sun and the moon, they were of equal size. The moon complained that it was improper for two kings to rule together, and therefore one of them should be diminished. God responded that if so, the moon's size should be diminished. The moon responded that it is unfair that it should suffer on account of having offered a justified argument. God placated the moon in various ways, such as having the stars accompany it, but the moon was not mollified until God said that the goat should be an atonement for him. The commentaries note that the inherent difficulty in the idea that God should require atonement for his actions. Different explanations have been offered, many based on Kabbalistic understanding of God's interaction with the world. The rift based on the assumption that one cannot talk of God's requiring atonement insists that the goat provides atonement only for the Jewish people, as Rabbi Yehuda explains that in the name of Shmuel in the Gemara. The intention of this Gemara then is only to explain why God decreed that the offering should be brought specifically at the new moon. This was not in order to atone for God's act of diminishing of the moon, but to placate the moon for having its size reduced. The Ritva cites a verse supporting the opinion that the word atonement can be used in this sense. When Jacob sent gifts ahead of his meeting with Esau, he stated their purpose literally, I will provide an atonement for his face, in Genesis 30:21, which clearly means, I will placate him. Accordingly, the phrase, this goat shall be an atonement for the fact that I diminished the size of the moon, should be understood as meaning that when the Jewish people bring an atonement for themselves, they will thereby also placate the moon on behalf of God. See Tosfot. The early commentators also note that one can learn from this Gemara that it is proper for a master who insults his servant to mollify him, and this applies even where it was a servant who transgressed and was justifiably punished. And that's from the Kuntras Harayot, citing Ozerua. The Gemara resolves this problem. If so, i.e., if the phrase was only needed for that statement, let the verse state only a sin offering for the Lord. For what reason does it state to the Lord? In order to expound it in accordance with that which we have said, that it atones only for a sin that the Lord alone is aware of. The Gemara asks, but why not say that the whole of the phrase comes exclusively to teach us halacha, and not to expound it in accordance with Reish Lakish's statement at all? The Gemara answers, if so, let the verse state a sin offering of the Lord. For what reason does it state to the Lord? You can conclude two conclusions from it. The Gemara asks, but let the goat atone even for other transgressions that a person never became aware of. Why does Rabbi Yehuda limit the scope of its atonement? The sage of the school of Rabbi Shmuel taught, since the goat of the new moon is brought at a fixed time, and that goat of Yom Kippur is brought at a fixed time, they must atone for similar transgression, just as the goat of Yom Kippur atones only for the defiling of the temple or sacrificial food, so too this goat of the new moon atones only for the defiling of the temple or sacrificial food. The Gemara says, we found a source teaching that the goat of the new moon atone for the defiling of the temple or sacrificial foods. From where do we derive that the goats of the festivals also atone for such cases? And if you would say that this can also be derived in accordance with that which the sage of the school of Rabbi Shmuel taught, that suggestion can be viewed as follows. If you try to derive it through a comparison to the goats of the new moon, the comparison is flawed, as those goats are more frequent than those of the festivals. What's the footnote? Shekain Tadir. As those goats are more frequent, the Gemara in Tractate Zevachim 91a derives a principle that a mitzvah that is performed more frequently takes precedence over a mitzvah that is performed less frequently. Apparently, the fact that it is performed with greater frequency demonstrates it is of greater value. Accordingly, the Gemara here states that one cannot necessarily derive that a halacha stated about something more frequent applies to something else less frequent. And if you try to derive it through a comparison to the goat of Yom Kippur, that comparison is also flawed, as that goat has more extensive atonement, since it atones for all sins. And as you would say, and that's the end of the Omid. Thank you for listening, and all the best. Bye.